Thanks, Laura. Okay, and I'm expecting it to, yes, it's coming up on my screen that recording has started, so that's fine. So welcome everybody to our Board of Directors meeting in public, and we're just running through what the intended agenda is, and we have agreed that there's no other items of business, and so I'm just inviting colleagues to declare whether there are any particular personal or financial or otherwise interests in the agenda items, which I don't think we have declared, so we'll note for that during the course of the meeting. And we're going to get straight into the agenda now then by welcoming our colleagues from Elderly Intermediate Care, Neurology and Stroke, CBU. And I'll turn to Sarge to introduce this, but of course, a warm welcome to you all. And this is intended to try and replace the unfortunate position we're in where board colleagues, particularly non-executive colleagues, are not able at the moment to come and walk the wards and visit you in person and understand the nature of your role and the challenges that you face. We've received the slides from you, thank you, and looked through those before this presentation. So I'll pass to Sarge to introduce the item, and I think it'll then go to Madge, will it, Sarge?
Thank you. Thanks, Max. It's a really good opportunity for, as you've highlighted, the board to connect directly with the CBUs, given the constraints we have around the rest of the board being out in the clinical areas. I'm pleased that Madge and colleagues have been able to join us today, and hopefully as part of this presentation, what they'll be doing is providing the board with an overview of the CBU, the services that the CBU provide, some of the key strengths and the challenges that they've experienced. The impact, of course, over the course of this last year of COVID on their services and their future plans for the CBU. And it's really nice to see the diverse range of individuals who've come along today to present. So I think really, without further ado, I'd like to pass on to Madge, and he'll take us through the presentation along with his colleagues. It might be worth, Madge, just to quickly introduce everybody that's here from the CBU as well, please.
I will do. I think the next slide, Laura. Thank you for inviting us, and I think looks like I'm going to do the talking, and then the others will chip in when they can do. I'll try and make it brief. We're just going to do a little overview rather than any more detail than that. I think most of us are here. This is the team that you see, with apologies from Mark Busby, Andrea Alanak and Caroline Varley can't be here, but I believe the rest I can see. I'm not sure if everyone wants to introduce themselves if they're here.
Hi, Madge. Jackie Crabtree, Deputy Matron for Intermediate Care for Community Hospitals.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stuart Maguire, Stroke Clinical Lead.
Morning, Stuart. Thanks.
Good morning. It's Brenda Mosley, Matron for Elderly Care and IMC.
Hi, Brenda. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. It's Awais Sabir, General Manager for the CBU. There's also apologies from Francesca Hill.
Good morning, Awais. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's the senior team, if you like, but as you know, most of the work is usually done by those below us that do all the hard work, and that's one of the strengths of our CBU, really. Next slide, Laura. So this is just an overview of all the services, and most of this is pre-COVID, and what we had for elderly care was Ward 3. Now, we've developed an admission unit for older people in 2004, and one of the first in the country, and I think the rest of the nation are still trying to catch us up. On top of that, we've got 2 downstream wards, 29 and 31 at Bradford Royal Infirmary, and a subacute ward at F6. So this really cares for acute ill older people that come through our doors, both from ED and GP services. In 2014, we again developed a unique hip fracture service, the first in the country again. Historically, hip fracture services were liaison for elderly care into orthopedic wards, and we switched that completely, where anyone over 60 with a hip fracture came directly to elderly care on Ward 31. We were a bit of a national outlier at that stage, and we turned that round to being top 5 in the country probably for outcomes. So that in a nutshell is part of our acute service. Then we've been blessed with intermediate care in Bradford for the last 20 years for inpatients. And we have a number of units that, as you all probably know, has changed in the last decade. And now they're located at Westwood Park, St. Luke's Hospital, and Westbourne Green. Now, this allows us for people that doesn't need acute care, but still needs inpatient rehabilitation to go to another setting. And one of the seminal trials was over 15 years ago when John Young was here, and we found that any delay in movement for older people that needed intermediate care, a one-day delay would worsen outcome. But we've been lucky to have these beds, and we've moved people very quickly to a non-acute setting for rehabilitation. And the national audit for intermediate care again showed good outcomes for Bradford. What we were missing then was a home rehab service. So again, one of the first in the country to develop a virtual ward for older people with a discharge to assess mentality. Now it's largely linked with Ward 3, our admissions unit, and we were able to discharge people very quickly back home, but have a multidisciplinary team go to their home to enable them back to a pre-morbid state, if you like. And we initially started this, as I say, as a step-down model, but about 2017, we then tried to avoid admissions and do step-up patients from home. So GPs, yes, were able to ring us and able to try and avoid ED admission and avoid direct admissions to wards. We won a national award, the HSJ award in 2017 for that. Now, none of this is done in isolation. What we need is a multi-specialist team, and we're lucky in that we've developed the MAID team within the hospital to help us with all of this, especially with the more complex discharges, and they're integral to elderly care services. From a stroke point of view, we're part of the hypoacute stroke. We are the hypoacute stroke unit, taking stroke both from Bradford and Airedale. And we've developed that with the network and collaborative work, and we could say that we're probably the first successful collaboration with Airedale as stroke, and we just need to keep building on that, really. Neurology is a bit of an enigma to me, I must admit, because I hadn't been managing it till the last 10 days, but always has been. But again, it fits nicely with the CBU as a multidisciplinary specialty, and we've got acute admissions that come on to Ward 6 again with stroke, and we need to develop the services with primary care, which we have strong links with. We've got one of the leading neuromuscular special experts in the country in Mark Busby, and we need to utilize his skills and build that further with some of our population problems, population in Bradford, and that's ongoing work that we're doing. Next slide. So we were going on quite well, really. Then something called COVID came along last year, didn't it? And I remember my nephew is in Wuhan, and he was been there for 3 years, and not this Christmas, Christmas before, he texted me and said, look, they're talking about a condition called SARS in Wuhan. What's that? I said, oh, don't worry about that, because it's all died down. You know, they had it a few years ago. And then by January, everything kicked off, as we all know. And that has, taken our CBU apart a little bit. It's our elderly care wards that were fit for purpose for older people, dementia, delirium. We had to turn that into the COVID wards. We lost one whole acute ward, and the benefits of the environment with that. Our hip fractures went back to orthopedics rather than under elderly care. And what we've noticed is older people got scattered, especially in the first wave of COVID, where the nursing skills in other wards were not the same as our nursing skills, or they weren't used to nursing older people and frailer older people, which was a challenge for them. So in addition to that, social care that we work with closely, again, had major problems with COVID because of red and green capacity. You know, local authority beds that we had to move patients for had to go into red and green, so there was delays in movement. Same as intermediate care for us. We couldn't move patients. Again, like I said, outcomes are worse if you move at a later stage. And we had to wait 14 days, and rightly so, to stop infectivity. So that was a challenge for us as well. Workforce, like every workforce, there was sickness, shielding, both in the medical staff and also the nursing staff, and that has been a challenge to work through. But, you know, as a CBU, we've worked through that, I think, very well, and we've risen to that. We still need to understand the psychological impact of what's happened this year. I think we're only scratching the surface, especially for Ward 29 staff that's been on the front line with the CPAP. And I think we need to start to unpick it as the numbers wind down, and we're doing that. One of the biggest challenges has been the visiting policy that's been, you know, that we had to adhere to from a national point of view. And that has been very difficult, and that added layers of conversation with families and friends and patients. That has been difficult, same as the nursing home population. You know, they have felt isolated, people have deteriorated because of that. So that has been one of the biggest challenges I think our CBU has faced. We've reduced our outpatient appointments from face-to-face. Again, that was pretty straightforward in the first phase where primary care wasn't referring, but it's been a bit more of a challenge as the year has gone on, when, especially for neurology patients, we needed to do more face-to-face. But we're getting that back. And again, capacity was reduced because especially stroke and neurology have contributed significantly to the SWORD rota. Next slide. No. So some of the strengths and successes is around the COVID year and a little bit generally. Like I say, a big strength for us has been working collaboratively, and both the medics, nursing, we've worked closely with both respiratory and the palliative care. All our services in the community, social services have been very linked and pulled together in the same direction, and that's how we've survived, I think, through this year. And you know, and that's partly because we had good relationships before COVID, and we just built on that. At the start of COVID, we developed some significant pathways with our GP colleagues for nursing home populations. We developed pathways to try and minimize transport for deteriorating patients, subacute patients who should be escalated. And we contributed to the super rota, which is based at the Airedale hub, and we work very closely with them. So we avoided unnecessary admissions to ED and admitted appropriately. And that has worked well, and it's something we're going to keep going with post-COVID. We've struggled a bit with appraisals, understandably, but we're catching up now, both on the medical side and the nursing side. And we've recognised how well all the staff have contributed in the CBU, and the thank you cards that was distributed at around November, December time were very well appreciated by staff. I think they felt valued with that. And I forgot to add that bit, all the elderly consultants for the elderly care wards, we bought a voucher for a pamper day for every member of staff, and that has gone down well, but unfortunately they've not been able to use it until probably next month when they reopen again. One of the positives has been therapy for 7 days, and I think we need to relook at this post-COVID. That improved outcomes, both in intermediate care and on the acute wards, where we didn't have inpatient, not also services had inpatient rehabilitation 7 days a week. So that was a definite bonus for us. We've carried on some of the integrated pathways with YAS to avoid admissions with the virtual ward. And that was a big benefit to stop transport to ED, where YAS would ring virtual ward for any patients they felt could be kept at home. And we will continue to work on that. Moving forward, I think we've not used telehealth as much within our services, but the Super Rota and the Airedale Hub had put telehealth into all care homes, and they were monitoring them remotely, and that was a big benefit and avoided admissions. And one of my proudest, I think, what I'm proudest of is Ward 29 staff. And they've stepped up from becoming elderly care nurses to almost HTU nurses overnight. And they've done that without any problems at all. And I think we should be very proud of them for that. And also for some of the other nurses in our, elderly care in particular, got hit with losing a ward. So Ward 3 nurses and Ward 27 nurses, we managed to keep the flow going. And I'm proud of them for doing that as well. From a stroke point of view, we've improved considerably over this last 12 months, and we're now on the SNAP data, we've scored a B in the latest figures. So that is progressive improvement. Again, we need to keep, and we know what we have to do, and we'll keep achieving, trying to get to an A. Next slide, please. So breaking down the service, what we need to do for elderly care and the virtual ward. So we're very good at looking after older people as they come through under us, but we need to now reach into surgical specialties and other specialties, medical specialties. And that is part of a business case that we're currently proposing. And that's quite well developed in other areas in the country, and the model does work well. We're going to develop a day unit. Again, COVID put a stop to that, where we may turn our outpatients into a day unit facility at the virtual ward. So it's a one-stop clinic where patients come for the assessments, but the modalities of that assessment is delivered at home. That's work in progress. We've developed our ACP force in the virtual ward, and we're looking at reaching into the blue zone to try and pull patients out from there rather than admit. And also there are some community transfers out of ours, and we may be able to avoid that trip for older people, and they could be the first port of call for that. So that's a piece of work we're going to have a look at. We need to continue to work with our primary care colleagues, and we're already in stages of talks about developing a hub and spoke model with them. So primary care networks are developing multidisciplinary teams, and they can step up to the virtual ward for a bit more intense input, and we can step back down for them. So that's all work in progress at the moment. From a point of view, we continue to work with the network and Airedale. And I think that there are some issues with workforce challenges that we need to face and try and sort out with business cases. But one of the enablers for this is trying to get one clinical lead across both sides. And I think that's something we need to try and progress, and we're in process of doing that. But also perhaps even managerially, look, if you're talking about one service, maybe we should just have a managerial lead across both sides, really. And I think that would probably provide, it probably be more efficient and probably be able to provide better working relationships between both sides, if you like. Neurology services, again, developing, there is lots of neurology that's unmet need, which primary care do want us to help with. So we're developing business cases and links with primary care. And one of the things I haven't put down on there actually is about looking at young disabled people or people with disability from, say, road traffic accidents, head injuries. We have long lengths of stay for these people pre-COVID. And I think when I last looked at the figures, we sent them to other rehabilitation units around the country. And I think CCG spent about £3 million on this. And I think we can do this as a joint venture with Airedale. And that's something we have to do, because we have got older people rehabilitation services in the community, but not younger people rehabilitation services. So all of these things hopefully is within our 3-year plan, maybe a 5-year plan. And embracing all of this is our virtual services that, you know, BTHFT want to develop. We've led on that with the virtual ward, both older people and the diagnostics, and I think we can embrace that. And one of the geriatricians hopefully will lead on that. So I think it links in nicely to all our CBU and other CBUs, really. I think that's just like a quick overview of all our services, and I think the team will be happy to take any questions.
Madge, thank you very much indeed. I'll perhaps turn to your 3 or 4 colleagues that are with you and just ask whether any of those would like to emphasise any particular points. It's an opportunity for the board to hear directly from you as to what you consider perhaps your key challenges or key strengths indeed, or what you would like us to hear. So would either Brenda or Stuart or Jackie or Awais like to take up the microphone for a couple of minutes?
I'm actually so I'm happy to add a few comments. And
please do it.
So Matt just covered majority of the issues that we've faced and the challenges that we've had, and I think I'm just going to echo how some of the successes for the CBU are that whilst we were presented with these challenges, is coming together across our services to come up with mitigating plans and ensuring that we're safe and ensuring the quality in terms of the service provision to our patients. And I think reflecting back on the way we worked with, particularly with stroke, in our collaborative meeting and our stroke planning meeting. So we set up a bi-weekly meeting where we meet as a multidisciplinary team with all our disciplines to ensure that we're unpicking any issues. And we've managed to really improve on our SNAP performance. So we achieved a B performance during the last the last sort of 4 months. And I think that performance really indicates that we were able to come together and pull it through as a team. So some of the benefits of that is how we've invested our time and ensured that we've kept some forums going to be able to deliver under that particular pressure. The other thing I just obviously want to bring up is around the nursing. So I spent some time going on to speak to our nursing staff, and I think the support, the psychological support that we provided on the wards was really beneficial to the teams, and the recognition of some of the work that they've done. To be fair, I think once we've produced thank you cards and badges, there's more we could do with those teams that have been on the front line and been challenged and stretched in many different ways. And the last bit, I think, whilst it has been quite challenging from an outpatient perspective and not being able to see patients that we'd like to see face to face, I think what we've been able to do is turn to digital, and we've been able to switch on some virtual capacity. So we've ensured that we've followed up all our patients across neurology and across stroke and elderly care as well. We've prioritised and still brought in face-to-face those patients that we felt need an urgent appointment, need to be seen on a face-to-face basis. So I think whilst presented with those challenges, we've still been able to come up with different solutions and work very differently to ensure some continuity in the services that we provide.
That's really helpful, Lewis. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, and I will just turn to Stuart or Jackie or Brenda just to see whether they would wish to bring anything to our attention. Otherwise, I'll open for questions. Stuart, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. The one thing I'd like to add is I think we have to recognise that the fact that we've been able to improve our SNAP data has relied heavily on the quality of our data collection, which is really excellent. And we have a data collection officer who is the envy of the region, really, and he's constantly sort of fending off, or we are fending off efforts for other people to poach him, because our data collection is really way above average in that we are able to predict our national audit scores before they're released. You know, in the past, 5 or 6 years ago, we were reacting to scores that were several months old, which was useless really, whereas now we can review our national audit data in real time, which, and to be honest, we're very lucky that SNAP is quite a common sense audit, you know, in that it audits things that are directly to do with patient care, and so it's a good reflection of our service, that the fact that that our scores are better. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that our data collection is really sort of national level. It's really high class data collection that we're doing due to our data officer, and we couldn't do it without him.
Thank you, Stuart. And is that data officer CBU wide or purely for the stroke service?
Stroke. It's for stroke.
Stroke service, okay. And you find that
for stroke service in Bradford and Airedale.
Thank you. Yes. Yep. Understood. Yeah. Thanks very much, Stuart. Okay. So, in the absence of any other colleagues coming in, I will turn to questions from the board. So, Madge, perhaps you'd either deal with the questions or send them to the person most appropriate. But Ray, I'll start with you, and then Karen. So, Ray, if you'd like to come in.
Thanks, Matt. So, not a question really, but just a couple of comments. Madge did touch on this slightly, but he's far too modest and unassuming to really give it the big up that it deserves. But I think over the last year, I think it's really important for the board to understand the impact of the pandemic on those within this CBU. When you see any pictures on TV, it tends to focus on the intensive care units and nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals on there doing their jobs. But in terms of the impact that this has had, there's been no bigger impact than it has on those in the care of the elderly department. As we all know, age has been the single biggest determinant of risk with COVID-19, and the way the medical nursing staff and other allied healthcare professionals in the care of the elderly department have stepped up and worked outside their comfort zones has been far greater, I think, than any other group of healthcare staff we've got in the trust. So I just want to sort of publicly say what an outstanding job they've all done throughout this last year, and to have maintained the dedication, the humour, and the improvements in other areas whilst being absolutely deluged by this awful thing over the last year has just been remarkable. So, Madge and all your team, thank you for all you've done and all you continue to do. Outstanding job.
Thank you, Ray. That's appreciated.
Well said, Ray. Thank you very much. And Karen, I'll turn to you for your thoughts, please.
I feel Dr. Smith's just stolen my thunder there, so I was going to say very similar comments. But what I would say is that throughout all of this, I've been incredibly proud of the nursing team, including the senior nursing team, and for the undivided focus and attention on two things really, which is the benefit and the care for the patient, and the kindness, the compassion, and they've shown in very difficult circumstances at times, but also the kindness and compassion that they've shown for each other. And what that tells me is that there's a sense of team and a sense of loyalty, and that's helped them get through this. And, you know, we're approaching a period now of recovery. So what I'd be interested in really to Madge and Brenda and Jackie Awais on the call is how do we maintain that support, health and well-being of the staff going forwards as we're coming out of this, that will allow them to be able to look after the patients, because I think we need to focus on. So a comment, thanks, and a question.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think we appreciate that. And I think the answer is cakes. Cake Monday used to be the thing. So, but if you reflect, if you look at our senior nursing staff across all our services, they've been here 20 odd years, some of them. And that reflects that we've done something right over this time for them to stay. So I think it is about working as a team rather than working as doctors or nurses or allied professionals. We feel every individual is part of our team. And I think that's what's helped us through this, really. Brenda, you want to add, or Jackie?
Yeah, it's Brenda. I'd just like to add that, you know, I think it's a sense of team. it's our commitment, you know, it's our focus. We're very resilient, and I think talking to other areas, they don't have what we have. We do take it for granted in elderly care that we are a very inclusive team, and I think that support has got us through. We were very strong as we went in, and I think that's you know, really helped us. That kept us in a very positive position, even when things got quite dark at times for everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. Jackie, of course.
Yes, I mean, Madge has captured everything, and Brenda, but from community hospitals, sometimes we're quite isolated units. And I think throughout COVID, the Trust has shown just immense support for community hospitals, that we're not isolated and that we are part of Bradford Teaching Hospitals. They've not forgotten us once along the way. They've included us with everything, and we've had particular support from the CBU unit. They have, you know, included us, and we felt part of this journey. And we've experienced things in different ways. We're not an acute, but we've still come across the COVID patients and, you know, some of our staff. So I'd like to thank, you know, Bradford Teaching Hospitals for all the support they've given us so far and continue to do.
Thanks very much, Jackie. We have some other exec colleagues who'd like to make a comment. So Mel, Saj and Pat. So Mel first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, team. It's in danger of becoming a big love in this, because there is so much in terms of positive praise and thanks that I think we all would want to convey to everybody in that team. In my experience over many years, this particular specialty is one of the most demanding. It always is a very labour intensive and a very emotionally intensive area to work in, and you heap on COVID on top of that, and then you've got a remarkable amount of work and expectation that we call upon those individuals in these teams to deliver. And the fact that you are so resilient and that you have got that longevity of people who are committed to stay in that specialty speaks volumes, because it often is one of the hardest areas to recruit to, and that isn't the case in Bradford. So I think that speaks volumes. And then the second thing is, this board is used to hearing now over the last 12 months of performance metrics that have been paused or have slipped or have become much more difficult to deliver. So I am sure the board is absolutely delighted, as are we all, to hear a reversal of that, you know, a complete turnaround in terms of the SNAP data and the performance in that particular area in the context of everything else that has been happening. So a massive well done and a huge thank you from me too.
Thank you very much, Mel. And Saj, I'll turn to you, please.
Thanks, Max. We are at risk of overlapping each other's points, but I think where I wanted to create the real link between what you've seen in that presentation is the direct impact on the performance, which you'll see later on in the performance section. So Matt described, and his colleagues described, the place-based models we've got in place, such as the MAID team, and Jackie's just been highlighting obviously some of the work, the social care input, and how that impacts and translates is into our long length of stay patients, or our super stranded patients as they're known, and the very small number of patients that we have who are classified as super stranded. And it's credit due to this team in terms of how they've been functioning, how they work, because it's usual for other organizations to have patients in the hundreds who are delayed in hospital because we can't get them to an alternative provision. And we know that that has, apart from flow impacts, that has a direct impact on the quality of lifestyle for that individual concerned, who has to spend 1 day longer than necessary or 1 week longer than necessary in a hospital when they don't need to be here. So that's credit to the fact of how the teams work. Our ambulatory care models are exemplary and a beacon really for the rest of the country to look at. And again, that's something that I wanted to sort of highlight as exemplary practice. And then Mel's picked up on the stroke point. I mean, honestly, if there was ever, it's difficult enough to go from an E or an F position to a B position in stroke data, but to do it in the midst of COVID is just testament to the way the team worked. And then lastly, around the recruitment and retention, again, Madge mentioned the Pamper Day that and the consultants have clubbed together and done something, but I picked up another example where I was just completely blown away by the generosity and the teamwork of the consultants. And they had a colleague who was struggling with going upstairs and they had an illness, and the consultants and the team have clubbed together and purchased that individual a stair lift. And that's the type of thing that this team has really driven forward. And this is why you hear the stories of people actually starting and not leaving. And Mel's quite right when she says that actually up and down the country, elderly care is one of the most difficult places to recruit into. And I think it's testament to the fact of Madge's leadership style, Awais, and other colleagues who have joined today in terms of how and what they do every single day. I've just, as a newcomer, I've just been bowled over by how this team operates. So it's really nice to see them come here and present their successes, but also receive the appreciation that they have from the board.
Thank you, Saj. And can I emphasise as chairman that this meeting is being recorded and published. So you have very senior directors of this organisation lavishing praise on this particular CBU, and they do so knowing that it's in the public domain. So well done, team. Pat, I'll pass to you for a final comment or question, please.
Okay, I'll be quick. So I don't know as the management team whether you've had a chance to look at your staff survey results yet, but in terms of sort of what you've said, particularly around team working, I think that is very much reflected through your CBU results. So we're seeing sort of strong performance in sort of team working, morale and immediate managers in areas where we have seen a reduction in other areas in the trust. So I think that in itself is sort of testament to what you've done over the last 12 months. So I would encourage you to have a look at your staff survey data. Thank you.
An aeroplane coming across you, Pat. Sounded like it, didn't it? Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, Pat. That's really useful to know. Okay, so I'm going to turn to Madge for the final word. But Madge, if you don't mind me saying, if you'll indulge me, that there were a couple of take-home messages I took from the significant briefing that you gave, and that was the huge importance of therapies, and also the potential for young disabled rehab in the community in Bradford. So those made my ears prick up, and I just want to say I'm going to invite exec colleagues, I hope, just have a reflection on those 2 points amongst all the other things you said, but I take those home as take-home messages. Madge, I'll pass to you for any final word you'd like to say to the board.
No, I mean, I think thank you very much, really, from the board for all the positive comments, and I think that means much to us, and we'll disseminate that information down to the ward staff as well. And everything is about team working, really, and I think if we can get that right for any CBU, you'll achieve a lot more. It's about going that extra mile for each other, and that's what we've done, and trusting each other, really, and believing in each other, and we've always done that, and we'll carry on doing that.
Team, thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for your input and thanks for the contribution of colleagues. So have a great day and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye and thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that was great. Saj, thank you for inviting that team. Really useful input, lovely brief presentation and great comments. So very encouraging. Thanks very much. Really helpful. Okay, colleagues, shall we move on with the rest of the business, please? We've a couple of matters to consider now from previous board meetings. So can I invite you to advise me of any matters of inaccuracy or amendment that are required from the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of January? If there are none, can we take those as a true record of the meeting in January, please? I think we can. And the only matter arising is shown as a closed action, which is that the Equality and Diversity Council will now be a standing agenda item on the board. So there is no further matters arising to concern ourselves with there. Moving to section 3, the business reports. Can I orientate you to paper 6, the report from the chairman? I do hope you've had a chance to have a quick look at this. It begins with a description of the key outcomes from the Council of Governors meeting held on the 21st of January. I should use this opportunity as chairman to thank all colleagues for the terrific attendance that has tended to be at Council of Governors meetings. We know how important they are. It's unusual for them to go to an online situation, and I'm grateful. I also want to repeat my thanks to Mel in particular for the last meeting. You will see items 9 and 10 there in section 1 that Mel provided significant comprehensive reports on how we're doing COVID-wise, but also Actors 1 as well. So thank you, Mel, for the quality of your contributions to governors. Much appreciated. The next meeting of Council of Governors will take place on the 15th of April. We look forward to that. Can I advise colleagues from item 2 that it's with regret that Mr. Alan English, Public Governor from Bradford South, who's given us 5 years of service, has had to retire from the council. And his vacancy indeed forms one of the 4 public posts that we are currently advertising for and in an election process. So at item 3, colleagues will see that there's a seat at Shipley, 2 at Bradford South and 1 at Bradford West. But I would like the board to note the significant contribution that Alan English from Bradford South did make, and thank him for that. We will hear the results of the elections to the Council of Governors on Wednesday the 5th of May. Just bring your attention briefly to item 6. Colleagues will know that the team, Jackie in particular, thank you Jackie Morris, pulled together a bulletin for me for our significant number of members, and we circulate that. We have some paper copies, but we circulate it generally online to the email addresses we get. I got some feedback that had we considered an easy read version, and I'm very proud to report to board that we've now done that and commissioned an easy read version. And so for those that request it, we will produce the easy read version and have that available for them every time to advise them of how we're getting on in the trust. Do note that there's some hands up, so I'll come to that in a second. And then I'll just finish by bringing the attention to the issues of the strategic partnering agreement. There are some slides included. So colleagues will know that your chairman, myself, has been involved in a multidisciplinary group reviewing the strategic partnering agreement as we move forward with Actors 1. And we all look forward to the session with health and care colleagues tomorrow, of course, tomorrow morning, at which we'll discuss the principles of Actors 1. The strategic partnering agreement was first agreed by this board in March 2019, and indeed I was involved with the clinical commissioning group when it was first being produced. And I'll just advise you, you'll recollect that it's a shared set of principles and governance. It doesn't remove any at all independent statutory authority that we have. We still have the authority as a board, but it's a set of principles about working well together and acting as one. So there are minor changes to that, generally in terms of the language and new names for particular partners that are involved. John will touch on it, no doubt, later in the board meeting as we talk about ICS developments. But we will be inviting board colleagues in May to consider the new strategic partnering agreement, and I hope to endorse it. I do want to make the point firmly to you that I've been fully involved in that with John Holden and Laura Parsons, and we're entirely comfortable with the shared set of principles that it outlines. So I'll ask you to note my chairman's report, please, and I wanted to bring those specific items to your attention. And I'll bring John and then Mohammed in for any questions or comments. So John, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Max. It was a comment and then a question that I'm hoping's already been picked up, but just for assurance, I'd like to be sure it has. I just wanted to commend the work on the Easy Read because it has such a wide-ranging impact in terms of any interpretation that we do in other languages and other formats. It's much easier to interpret an Easy Read version and much less confusing. So I'd commend that wherever we can do it. So I wanted to draw attention to that. Pardon my ignorance, but the question really was, by Easy Read, I'm assuming we really mean easy to understand, and it's heavy on graphics and low on words. I just wanted to be assured we had picked up that issue of graphical interpretation as well as the words. Thank you.
That's it. That's exactly right, John. And indeed, I will circulate it. I'll circulate the Easy Read document for colleagues to see. But that's exactly what it is, John. And we have used a local, well thought of provider to produce that Easy Read version for us.
It might be a bit advanced for me, Max, but I'll do my best to colour it in.
Very good, John. Very good. It was you I had in mind, John, when we produced it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'm glad you feel able to commend it as well. That's great. Thank you. Mohammed, shall I bring you in, please?
Thanks, Chairman. Just a quick question, perhaps it's for you, Chair, or perhaps for John Holden. It was around the strategic partnership agreement, and particularly I wanted to pick up around the workforce. There's a nice table in the slide deck around our work plan for September to September 2021. And just around workforce, I just wanted to check that we were linking in with the Academic Health Science Network for Yorkshire and Humber in terms of that integrated workforce plan, and also kind of Health Education England in terms of nursing and other allied health professionals and medics in terms of the universities in our area, and making sure there's an integrated plan in terms of how we bring them through all this kind of healthcare workers, and there's a plan for kind of matching our requirements and our needs with the training of these health professionals.
I'll turn to John and Laura just for advice on that particular point. I don't know if I have that specific detail, Mohammed, but we can pick up on it. John or Laura, are you able to answer that those specific questions, or should we remit them to the SPA group?
Oh, I think on workforce planning we should probably defer to Pat, but I think the short answer is yes, we are working both at place level, at regional level, and indeed nationally with HEE. We are plugged in. I think Pat ought to comment on the specifics.
Thanks, John.
Do you want me to come in? Sorry, Matt.
Yes, please, Pat. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I can confirm we're definitely linking in with HEE and also with our local universities in terms of training and work plans. The AHSN I'm less clear about, so I will just check that and come back to you if that's okay.
Perfect. Lovely. Thank you, John and Pat.
Thanks very much. Thanks, John. Pat, that's great. Pat, you did put a hand up. Was that for this issue, or did you want to raise anything else?
No, it was for this issue.
For this issue, that's great. Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Mohammed. That's a useful question, and we will pick up on those issues. Thanks very much. Okay, in the absence of any further comments on my paper, I will move on. Colleagues will be aware, of course, we do have a chat function, and where appropriate, do please use that, and we will endorse the minutes accordingly, where appropriate, from the chat section as well. I'll turn to Mel, who, as ever, will bring us a verbal update so that we're right up to date with what we need to be aware of as a board of directors. So, Mel, could we turn to the report from the Chief Executive, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. I will present the report as has become the custom in relation to our strategy of people, partners and place. So starting with people, which is our work colleagues, Team Bradford and our patients. The last time the board came together in January, we were experiencing a third surge in the number of COVID positive inpatients. Around that time, we had between 140 or 150. Those numbers are reducing, and today we have 30 inpatients, which is a significant reduction and very, very welcome, of course, of which 11 are receiving non-invasive ventilation and 6 are in ITU. Across our community, rates, however, do remain quite high, 145 per 100,000 of our population, and as such we've got the 5th highest rate of prevalence of COVID-19 in the country. The reducing number of COVID patients means that we can increase our elective activity, both general, inpatient and day case, which of course, as a board, we are fully aware has been severely impeded over the last 12 months. Whilst we've continued to maintain emergency surgery and procedures for patients with the highest priority clinical need, routine operations for less clinically urgent conditions has largely been suspended, and our focus for the coming weeks is to make sure that the necessary changes to ward configuration and workforce configuration, allowing the mobilisation of theatres, which will involve reorientating and refreshing the skills of our theatre colleagues after they've had a significant period of redeployment to other clinical areas across the trust is a priority. Gearing up in this way to begin to tackle the backlog of patients waiting for procedures has, though, to be done against the context of having large numbers of clinical staff who are exhausted. They've experienced probably the most challenging of experiences in their working lives for a sustained period. And the Chairman and I this week attended a virtual meeting of NHS providers, chairs and chief execs coming together, where we heard from Perena Issa, the National Health Service Chief People Officer, who fully recognises that the expectations around restarting business as usual must, especially during the first quarter of this coming financial year, pay sufficient attention to the health and well-being of our staff if we are to avoid the medium-term staff impacts such as burnout, an increase in sickness absence, staff deciding to leave the service. Myself and our exec directors are working to ensure that our staff continue to feel supported and valued and recognised for their work, and we're taking practical steps to ensure that our staff, our most valuable asset, want to come to work at Bradford Teaching Hospitals and are happy and fulfilled in their working lives. I hope that you have heard from our colleagues in the elderly care that those efforts and endeavours that the exec team and others have made throughout this period to ensure that people do feel valued, do feel included and engaged with, have been effective. But later we'll hear from Pat Campbell, our Director of HR, on our most recent staff survey and how we will use its findings to inform our approach to delivering our people plan over the next 12 months. Last week, on the 11th of March, it was the 12-month anniversary of the hospital receiving its first COVID patients. And to mark that occasion, a presentation was made to the team on Ward 31. A picture depicting clinical staff as superheroes that had been painted by a young relative of a member of Trust staff was presented. It's been really hard to single out any specific area in the hospital to be the recipient of such a gift. But we chose Ward 31 as it has been from the very beginning of the COVID period, the team that received their first COVID patient in Bradford into that area, and has consistently been a focal point for the delivery of COVID care. And indeed, as we see those numbers of patients reducing, it will be our designated COVID ward. And those staff, that team, will continue to, for however long there is a need to, care for the COVID patients of Bradford. The light at the end of the tunnel, of course, comes in the shape of the vaccination. And whilst there is much talk, and I'm sure Karen may later today update people on the latest developments in respect of the vaccination programme at a national level, our own hospital vaccination hub has been operating since December last year. Initially, in addition to vaccinating our own frontline staff, it provided the facility to vaccinate others, including members of the public and staff from partner organisations. We've now delivered over 20,000 vaccines from our vaccination hub at the Sovereign Lecture Theatre, between 70 and 86% of our staff. And there is a discrepancy in terms of being able to share with you the actual number of staff because of problems with data collection. We know that not all our staff have received vaccines from the vaccination hub. Some have received their vaccines from primary care, and reconciling the actual figures has been quite difficult, though we continue to work on that. But between that number, 70 and 86 have received their first vaccinations. And we are endeavouring to have conversations with any staff who up to now have not yet sought to receive their vaccination, by way of individual conversations with those people to understand what it is that may prevent them from seeking to receive the vaccine. On the 8th of March, we commenced the administration of our second dose of vaccinations, and that will continue throughout April and early May. Unusually for this time of year, I'm going to move on now to planning guidance and financial allocations. We're in the final month of this existing financial year. It's been a strange time in terms of the normal cycle for business in the NHS, an unprecedented year, with the last 12 months seeing the suspension of the usual planning and resourcing activities superseded by the need to react to a COVID environment. And as we approach the beginning of the financial year, it is unprecedented that at this point we still await confirmation of our financial allocations for the forthcoming year. And Matthew will describe the approach to planning and budgeting we are therefore taking later in this meeting. In terms of our partners and our activities as part of West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts, reflecting the reduction in the demand for COVID inpatients across West Yorkshire, the 3 times weekly WIAT Gold Command, whose role it was to ensure that we as an ICS were able to meet the critical care demands throughout, wherever necessary, the provision of mutual aid between the 6 trusts in West Yorkshire has now been stood down. Another symbol of the improvement in the COVID situation across West Yorkshire that is very, very welcome. Although not reducing yet to normal numbers across ITU in terms of the open capacity to receive COVID patients, the levels have significantly reduced across the region, and the need to provide mutual aid across the region or indeed to other parts of the UK has now stopped. At a place level, our Act as One approach to integrated health and social care provision across Bradford District and Craven continues at pace. Yesterday, our interim programme director, Mike Hindmarsh, was appointed substantively to the role following interview by myself and the CEO of Airedale Trust and the CEO of Bradford District Care Trust. Other stakeholders, including our commissioning colleagues, voluntary sector and local authority colleagues, were involved in that recruitment process. Also, Shaq Rafiq, our newly appointed Associate Director of Communications Engagement for Act as One, commenced in post on the 10th of March. Later we'll hear from John, as the Chairman has alluded to, Director of Strategy, about the white paper that was published in February. And was consulted upon ahead of planned legislative changes, which it's hoped will make it easier for NHS bodies like ourselves, local authorities and others to work together in an Act as One environment. In our place, Bradford District and Craven, we welcome the direction of travel, recognising within the paper much of the aspirations that are the founding principles of our Act as One approach. At ICS level, and at place level, I have been working with colleagues and partners to prepare for the legislative changes to be enacted. And the Chairman's already alluded to a virtual event tomorrow aimed at non-exec colleagues, governing bodies and other stakeholders from across our place that will take place to offer the opportunity for further understanding the impacts and implications of the legislative changes and our role as a trust in that. And finally, Chair, this board has a collective ambition to see our ageing estate replaced with brand new state-of-the-art fit for future hospital buildings. And so myself and executive colleagues are working together now with design partners to develop a strategic outline case which will come back to this board in April for approval. If the board is content with to sign off the case, it will be submitted to the NHS England to seek funding support initially to work up an outline business case. This is a really exciting proposition for the whole of Bradford, an opportunity to create a facility that enables us to deliver 21st century healthcare in the most effective way, a fantastic environment for both our patients and for our staff. It will be the beginning of a very long journey, I have no doubt, but we're committed to see this through to its conclusion, whenever that may be. I'm excited by the prospect and excited also by the support that we are receiving from our local authority leaders, our council partners, our commissioners, our local MPs, and from our integrated care system. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mel. A useful report. Thank you. Colleagues, are there any particular questions or further detail required of our CEO, please? I don't think there are now, so people are content with the detail they've had so far, so thank you very much. There's plenty to get through in the board meeting as well, so much appreciated, Mel. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm going to move to section 4 now then, please, which is the delivery of the Trust Clinical Strategy. And under there, you'll see that there are 2 reports from the chair of the Regulation and Assurance Committee. So obviously, I chair that on behalf of the board, and colleagues will know that it's the primary assurance meeting at which we all meet as a board and go through the various performance metrics that arise in the different areas of our work. I'm not going to go through the reports. You've seen them, you've had the chance to read them. They're extremely detailed. They arise as a recording of the meetings, but you're invited to note, and obviously I'll open for any questions of detail, but you're invited to note the Regulation Committee minutes of 17th of February and of 10th of March, actually. And I should say, as chairman, a huge well done and thank you to Laura and the governance team for turning round the significant detail of a meeting that we only held a week ago on the 10th of March. So that's terrific, and a full report there that colleagues have had the chance to see before it's placed here in the public domain at our public board meeting. So you're asked to note and derive assurance from that. Of course, the vast majority of us were present at those meetings, but may I ask whether any questions or further detail might arise from those reports, please? And in the absence of that, we move directly to section 4A, which is quality. And there are a couple of items of quality matters that we need to discuss there. So we're going to consider a proposal for the mental health strategy, taking us through 3 years, 21 to 23, and also a report to note research in the trust. So I will turn to Karen in the first place, and Karen, invite you to emphasise any points you wish to raise with us regarding the mental health strategy, please. Am I right in thinking that we welcome Sarah Turner as well to this part of the meeting? And that's you in the background, Sarah. So a warm welcome to you. I should also say, by the way, colleagues, that we do have Helen Wilson, Staff Governor, observing. So welcome to you, Helen. You're very welcome as an observer. And I'll turn to Karen and Sarah now and invite them to advise us of the key points of the mental health strategy.
Thank you, Max. I'm going to hand over to Sarah, but first of all, just to stress my thanks to Sarah, who, whilst working behind the scenes on this strategy, has also been leading the work around learning disabilities and dementia care and lots of other things, and helping to provide a 7-day-a-week responsive service to our most vulnerable adults in the organisation. So special thanks to Sarah and her team for going above and beyond. I'll hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk through the key points of what is a very simple plan on a page for a strategy document, because we do have a place-wide document. Sarah's pulled some slides together, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah to go through that now. Do you want to set me up?
Yeah, that's what closing the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to you, Sarah.
Good morning, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Sarah Turner. I'm Assistant Chief Nurse for Vulnerable Adults. There are just a few slides around this, so please feel free to ask any questions at any point. And this strategy on the page has been the culmination, really, of probably the last 2 years worth of work in trying to pull it together into something tangible and that we can have a reference point. So the main vision is, as it says there, to promote, protect and improve positive mental health whilst providing outstanding physical care. In line with NCPOD guidance, the 5-year forward plan for mental health, we often treat people in isolation. So we treat the mental health in one place, we treat the physical health in another place, and we don't really take into consideration that holistic view of people. If you can just move on to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So approximately 1 in 4 people in the UK will experience a mental health problem in any given year. So that's they will have a diagnosable mental health condition within a 12-month period. And patients with a mental health illness or diagnosis are at 3 times greater risk of premature death and a reduced life expectancy of approximately 20 years, with suicide accounting for 25% of deaths. And I have to say, I've been a qualified mental health nurse now for 25 years, and that reduced life expectancy hasn't decreased in that period of time. And that's shocking in this day and age. And when we talk about reduction in life expectancy, we're talking about comorbidities really. So people with significant mental illnesses often experience higher rates of diabetes, heart disease. They tend to be smokers and the associated risk with that. They don't tend to be engaged in communities as well. So obviously that routine health screening isn't picked up as well. So that's why we tend to see a lower life expectancy. But obviously suicide accounting for 25% of deaths, again, that's not a figure that's changed significantly. Next slide, please. So the 4 key areas that we focus on as priorities. The first one's training. Where do you start really with training? There's lots of things we need to do around mental health, but we need to be clear that it's what's within our gift within acute services, because I trained for 3 years to be a mental health nurse, and we're not saying that we need to train people to that level. What we need to do is make sure that our staff are equipped with the knowledge relevant to their roles, so that they can help people as they come into our service. I've just put on this slide an example of some of the training that we started. So we've just recently got a mental health practitioner in post. He's going to start leading on some of this work. And newsletters are a great way to get messages out to staff. We're also developing a suite of different training so that we'll look for opportunities to put training in at every level in our mandatory training, and that'll be through our safeguarding training. But also looking at things like conflict resolution, de-escalation, breakaway and restraint where required. And that's to link in with the clinical response to restraint work that we're doing as well. One of the other key points I think to note is the work that we need to do around therapeutic environments. Acute hospitals are not great for people who are in psychological distress. They're busy, they're noisy, they're overstimulated, and we need to look at opportunities about how we can make safe spaces for people. Next slide, please. So workforce. Like I say, that's Ash, who's our new mental health specialist practitioner. There are a number of mental health nurses already working in this trust, me being one. There are 4 of us in my team alone, so we're slowly creeping our way in. And we need to look at where we've already got existing workforce speciality, but then how do we embed specialism within our establishments? So looking for opportunities, and that work's already started around front door services, so A&E, AMU, looking at getting mental health nurses within that establishment, because that helps with that early recognition, the early support, the early care plans, the softer stuff really around making sure environments aren't busy, looking at opportunities to engage with people. Within workforce, it's how we support our workforce as well. We've had an incredibly busy year, as everybody is more than aware. Our workforce have experienced their own mental health concerns around that as well. So how do we support our staff to make sure that moving forward, they're in the best place they are as well to continue working? And we're doing some work with occupational health around that, and obviously Ash is part of that in looking at opportunities. One of the things that we started in 2019 was the opportunity around student placements for mental health nurses, so that there's an appreciation of mental health nurses' work roles and work within acute care, but also to try and encourage mental health nurses to come into acute care, because they have a set of skills, they're just a different set of skills, but they're registered nurses and in some areas would be really helpful. Next slide, please. So information sharing. When we had EPR introduced, it's great to have electronic systems. Sadly, our electronic systems don't talk to the care trust electronic systems. So one of the issues has always been around how do we gain access in a timely manner to somebody's mental health information so that we can understand baseline, we can understand support in the community, and we can understand how best to support those individuals. We're now just about to start with a very limited access to the mental health module on System 1 for my team, so that we can assist our staff with some of that information rather than relying on PLNs, which is what we do currently. So the psychiatric liaison nurses from the care trust who are based in A&E, they currently provide our information in relation to whether somebody's known to mental health services, who supports and things like that. So we're hoping that that will give us a much more timely access. Increased understanding about information sharing. You know, we often find ourselves in these situations that people feel they can't share information, but actually when we're looking at risk and determining the best way forward for somebody, it's really important that we share information in a relevant, necessary and proportionate manner. I think coming from a very, safeguarding background, we're very aware of how important information sharing is, and that that's done in a really appropriate way. And from an information sharing point of view about how we learn from concerns, and that's across the board, across the system, across the district. How do we learn from each other when there are concerns? And we've had some SIs over the last 12 months where, we've done them jointly with the care trust, and that's been really helpful. That's been really helpful in picking up the barriers to making sure that we have good care for our patients to access us. And that's led on then to some of the further work that we've described previously. Next slide, please. So partnerships. I think we're in a really good position at the minute from a mental health point of view. I think the Actors One, the district-wide work, it feels like there's never been a greater appetite really for all working together on trying to get a shared outcome. Making sure that, as I've put on there, some shared governance. What are often barriers within our organisations, as we know, are our own internal governance structures that don't align potentially with another organisation's governance structures. So we're at different points in a journey sometimes. We already do lots of work with the local authority in relation to third sector and voluntary sector funding initiatives. We've got Youth in Mind in our younger people services that are supporting our younger people with mental health conditions. We work with education, work regularly with the police around 136 detentions, and obviously we work very closely with the care trust. So we need to look, and the plan is very much over the next 12 months around looking at those co-designs of service where we can all work together, and the opportunities for that. Because I think, as I said earlier, we've never been at a better position really for looking at that co-design of service. That's it for the presentation. I just want to bring your attention to a few things in relation to mental health. One of the main ones is the Mental Health Act and the number of detentions that we've seen over the last 12 months under the Act, because that's quite telling. One of the issues that we sometimes have when we're looking at data to really understand numbers or how much of a problem something is that our data doesn't capture the right information. So often when people present at A&E, they'll be coded as generally unwell or unwell adult. It's not necessarily a mental health coding. So that's a real problem then in trying to understand what that problem is. Our Mental Health Act data though, because it's statutory, is much easier to do with. So what we did is we looked at data from March 19 to February 20 and the number of detentions. So the number of 5-2 detentions, which are doctors holding powers for 72 hours because you are concerned about somebody's mental health, were 39. In the same period, from March 20 to February 21, so, well within our COVID pandemic, Section 5.2 is linked to 73. So that's nearly 100% increase in presentations, which not only is a significant number in itself, it's significant by the fact that the general population coming through the hospital was much reduced. So you've seen this massive spike in presentations of acute mental health distress. I think another figure that's always worth looking at is section 136, which are the police detentions. So where you pick the police will see somebody in distress, pick them up, bring them to a place of safety, to allow for further assessment of that mental health presentation. Slightly different timeframes, but in February 2019 to October 2019, there were 221. In the same period last year, 20, so February to October, there were 314. So across the board, we're seeing in the last 12 months a huge increase in distress, in people being acutely unwell, and that distress coming across. As an acute provider, we're often seen as a safe place for people to come to. So we need to make sure that we're equipped to respond to that. Are there any questions?
Sarah, thanks very much indeed. Well, firstly, from the board of directors, can we all endorse how much we appreciate what you're doing? Your services are truly patient-centred, and well done to you. Thanks for pulling this together. Thanks also for picking up on the point of numbers, which is something I just sent a note to Karen about. I'd like to understand an idea of the numbers, and I get your point about the difficulty sometimes of data quality of presentations through A&E. So that's great. Thank you. I'll open up for questions and comments, but I'll just remind the board of directors that we're being asked to consider this strategy, and if we feel is appropriate, we should endorse it and endorse the work that's going on to implement it. So I'll start with Mark and then turn to Mohammed. So Mark first, please.
Thank you, Chair. So Sarah and Karen, I think that's really vital information and a really fantastic service that we do need to offer the organisation. And I think certainly sat from my perspective, managing the facilities side and knowing the mental health sufferers that are coming into the organisation and the challenges that we have, of course, around the management, and I'll call it the therapeutic management need of this clientele, if you want. You know, we have serious issues around violence, aggression and restraint. And I think if we have a proactive measure to be able to deal and manage and operate around all of this, that is absolutely going to help matters, because, you know, obviously those figures that you've related to correlate through the organisation to what's been having to dealt with across the piece. It cuts through different services. So I think anything and everything we can do to support this will be an absolute positive step in the right direction in every way. I just wanted to let that be known to everybody and the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And Mohammed, I'll turn to you now, please. You're just still on mute, Mohammed.
Sorry, even after a year, I'm still doing this.
We can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Apologies. I just wanted to endorse your comments, Chair, and Mark's comments in terms of the policy and the strategy. I think this is really positive, step forward, it's really good. Just a couple of small things to pick up on. One perhaps for you, Sarah, and one perhaps for Paul Wright, I think. In terms of the strategy, I wanted to just pick up on the training element of it. So I know we were talking about having kind of mandatory training for all staff, which I think is a good thing. But it leaves me with a question in terms of how do we know it's having an impact? And I guess what I'm doing is I'm drawing a line from this kind of proposed mental health training that's mandatory and the training we've had around diversity. Sometimes when that training is mandatory, everyone can do it, but we don't actually see that translated into an impact. And what I'd be really keen to do, to look at in terms of the strategy, and perhaps you can take this away and look at it in your team, is how will we measure the patient level impact? Because that's ultimately or the staff level impact. That's the impact that we're keen to see. And then one for Paul, perhaps. Paul, in the paper, it talked about, and Sarah referenced it, the electronic systems. And I think the stuff in there around System 1 access and shared patient access is all really good. But one of the big challenges I've seen nationally and in the region has been around business processes, particularly around primary care and general practice. So a good example in this particular area is around clozapine. So what we've seen is that kind of clozapine is prescribed in secondary care, and that information is shared with general practice. But unfortunately, some kind of repeat offenders in general practice don't have the right business processes to input that data correctly and that means it doesn't flow onwards onto the shared care records, summary care record, that kind of thing. So I'd be keen to understand not just the digital bit, but the business process bit, and picking up on those repeat offenders, particularly in primary care, that can break the system and then it doesn't work and the information doesn't flow.
Thank you very much indeed, Mohammed. Sarah, shall I turn to you first regarding an assessment of training impact, and then maybe ask if Paul has a comment on business processes? So Sarah first.
Like I said, at the minute we're looking for opportunities at different levels for training about how we embed that already in our existing training, and its natural fit is within safeguarding. What we'd hope to see moving forward is that the numbers of concerns relating to mental health patients raised either via datics or via restraint, things like that, reduce, because actually if we have a better system and understanding of people and their presentations, then hopefully what we don't see is that we contribute to that distress, which is what often happens in relation to incidents. So what we would hope to see is a reduction in incidents. I think the other thing is making sure that we then establish some good assessment of that training, so do people feel more confident? Because what we know, or what staff often tell us, is that they are fearful around patients with a significant mental health concern, that they don't know whether they're saying the right thing. And actually, that's quite easy to measure in some respects in relation to training, because it's how confident were you before and how do you feel afterwards. But I think certainly it's about pulling together and triangulating the data around the incidents and then the feedback from training.
Thank you, Sarah. And Paul, is there a role here digitally for improving business information sharing?
I mean, there are a couple of things triggered from Mohammed's intervention, Max. I mean, one for me is the benefit of having a non-executive director with a degree of expertise he has, because I'll have to follow up specifically on his reference to repeat offenders in relation to clozapine, just to understand exactly what that means and what loop is not being accurately or positively completed in that context. I think more broadly, I mean, I heard from the presentation just the fundamental challenge again about information sharing comprehensively amongst partner organisations with different underpinning systems. There is some work developing under Act as One to try and improve our capability of relating to System One as a sort of foundation partner across the estate and local authority in the mental health trust and in primary care. So I think there is a positive direction to travel reflected there. And I guess my last point is we're beginning to have the conversations under Act as One around, if you like, the 21-22 business plan around digital in place. And I'm very conscious that medicines management or medicine strategy in the round, however you describe it, is often not featured in these conversations. I mean, it is often left out. We talk about lots of other aspects of dependency and digital, but we don't recognise both from the expenditure side and more particularly, as Mohammed's highlighted, from the quality and joined up nature of the experience that patients have in terms of relying on medicines administered or prescribed or accessed from different parts of the system. So it's a sort of note to self in those conversations around the 21-22 Act as One digital programme. Where do we fit medicines into that more comprehensively than it has been to date?
Thank you, Paul. Mohammed, Paul's offering a note to self. Are you happy with the...
Yeah, very happy to pick that up, Paul, offline. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Paul. Karen, can I bring you in?
Thanks, Max. My question is really around the breadth of workforce that you train. So you talked about the fear of staff dealing with some of the mental health issues and people presenting, and obviously these people do present at A&E as well. So if I think about the security of that and people being fearful of people turning up presenting with mental health issues, how do you cope with that? And you know, do you train security in terms of being able to handle these people differently?
Yeah, so prior to getting a dedicated mental health nurse within that role with that specific function, and Ashley came into post in January, it was very much done as a bit of a piecemeal. So in relation to incidents and concerns, so I've been down and delivered training. We deliver training on mental health, specifically around the Act, but in relation to general presentations and de-escalation. because we also do it around Mental Capacity Act, so it kind of fits in quite nicely. As part of moving forward, and now Ashley's in role, he's based within A&E 1 day a week, with that specific focus on, let's have a look at what it is that we need to know, and what are you concerned about, and some peer learning really, so that actually if there are concerns, Ash is in a position to take staff with him on that journey of training. So yes, there will be formal training, but there's also a lot of informal training goes on as well. Our dementia lead is a mental health nurse as well. She does lots around general, how to approach people. If people are saying things that sound a little bit strange, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to increasing aggression? We do kind of lots of informal work around that already, and have done for a number of years, and security are well embedded in that. As part of the work around, as Mark referenced earlier, we're doing the clinical response to restraint. So my team will be involved in attending every restraint that happens with a therapeutic and clinical focus. So making sure that it's the least restrictive, that restraint, if it has to occur, the holds are released as soon as possible, that we coordinate that to make sure that actually if somebody's crying out in a way, that's an expression of an emotion. So they're either frustrated or they're angry or they're confused, but it's the expression of an emotion. And I think if we understand that and our staff understand that, they view that differently. So they don't view it as somebody's doing this to them because that's how they are. They're trying to tell you something. So let's listen, So yeah, there's much more formal training coming on, but actually there's been a lot of informal as well.
Thank you, Karen. That's great. I can see that answers your queries. There are also some very positive comments in the chat box as well. So thank you to colleagues for that. Mark, bring you in for a final point.
Yeah, just a final quick one, Karen, just to reassure on what Sarah's saying. This has been looked at very closely quite recently as part of all of this, and the security teams on site, just for reassurance, do actually a 4-day bespoke de-escalation and restraint training session, and they've got annual refreshers. We also have a policy that's very strictly adhered to in terms of the process, in terms of the control room and how we react and the people that do attend those. And I think the strength now in this, certainly in what Sarah's alluding to, is that the kind of extra level of bespoke clinical training around being able to manage that situation, to provide that clinical nursing therapeutical management response to that will only strengthen that position as well. So it was just to reassure, really, there's a lot of work being done, and I think we're in a very healthy position, certainly from my perspective in security.
That's really helpful to know. Thanks very much, Mark. Sarah, if I might take the last question, please. I can see from the papers that this proposed strategy is in keeping with the local strategies beyond the hospital. And I appreciate that this is an internal strategy. This is about us getting our act together as well as we can. But my question would be, are you satisfied there's been sufficient consultation with partners regarding the production of our strategy?
So we've worked really closely with the Care Trust. We have lots of conversations generally, and have done over the number of years, about where we see that combined. Wider than that, it gets a little bit tricky. We started in 2019 consultation with people with lived experience, and we were just starting that process going, and then unfortunately COVID kind of ground a halt to everything. Yes. So the intention is very much to pick that up. We absolutely want people with lived experience to tell us about that. I think for board assurance, my team are very clear about listening to patients that we go and support. And one of the messages, and one of the main messages around this strategy, certainly in relation to electronic systems, is that people get fed up of telling the same story over and over again. And that, the one thing that most people that I support when there's an issue will tell me is, tell me what's happening. I don't want to, because I've already told that other nurse. So actually, again, it comes back to that informal consultation. We speak very closely with carers, we speak very closely with patients when they are in and if they have the capacity to tell us. But more formally, moving forward, the plans are now in place to get that patient experience and engagement. Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for dealing with the additional information required of board colleagues. So the recommendation to board colleagues, please, is that we approve the strategy and that we endorse the ongoing work.
Are we content to do that? We've received sufficient detail in order to be able to do that, so there is unanimous support for the strategy. Thanks very much, Sarah. Karen, I think this would be a great thing for the board to hear about progress, you know, maybe in 9 months, 12 months time or something like that. Does that sound about a reasonable timescale, and would it be in order with you, Karen?
I think we'd absolutely love to come back and talk about the work, go one step further, and maybe hopefully we might be all in a room together, and perhaps Sarah and some of her team can come and update on that as well. So very much support.
Brilliant. That's great. Well, Sarah, you go from here with the full support of the board for the work you're doing, and we're grateful for what you pulled together. So good luck in implementation, and we'll look forward to hearing from you in an appropriate time as to progress with the strategy. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you, colleagues. At paper 10, Ray, you brought to our attention some research in the Trust, which was a great read, actually, and a reminder of all the different sort of faculties that we've got within this particular Trust and research. The paper is to note, but is there anything you would wish to draw out of that for board attention, please?
Just a couple of things, if that's okay, Max. Thank you. So first of all, just by way of introduction to this, I think there was eagerness from the board, understandably so, to be more cited on the research work that's going on in the Trust. We've got world-class researchers here and world-class facilities, and we're very keen to make that an integral part, really, of everything we do in BTHFT. We know that high-quality research attracts the very best people to the organisation. We know that it really advances improvements in patient care. So I think it's really important to integrate the work of the research facility here into everything we do. So what the plan is to bring a quarterly report to board, and also for Professor John Wright and Dr. Tracy Watson to actually attend board on a reasonably regular basis, so that they can actually present some of the work in a little bit more detail, obviously because they're very much the experts on it and will be in the best place to answer any specific questions about it. So we hope to make this much more visible to the board going forward. The report obviously stands for itself, so I certainly don't plan to go through it in any detail, but if I can just highlight 2 or 3 things, if that's okay. So obviously a very unusual year, and to give you an idea, at the start of the pandemic, there were in excess of 500 research studies in progress as part of the research facility here. Because of COVID, about half of those studies were suspended, but a lot of the staff were redeployed, doing other things, a lot more of the sort of frontline clinical work. Some of the opportunities, though, that the pandemic have offered have been really important, I think. So one example is the involvement with vaccine research. So Bradford was one of 4 regional vaccine hubs trialling the Novavax vaccine. And we recruited 726 volunteers overall, and it was a fantastic setup. It was down at the University of Bradford. I know it was a good setup because I was one of the volunteers, and they really looked after us very well. As you're probably aware, the Novavax vaccine has been shown to be safe and effective, and the licensing process, should I say, is going through now. And we hope and expect that Novavax will be a significant part of the armoury against COVID going forward. And allied to that, last year saw Bradford established as one of only 5 patient recruitment centres nationally. So these are aimed at making research in the NHS much more effective. So it's looking at late phase clinical research, getting research through at pace and at scale. And the idea was that these centres should be away from the more traditional centres, London, Oxford, Cambridge. So the 5 were established in Bradford, Exeter, Blackpool, Leicester and Newcastle. So I think that's a really positive thing to move some of these centres away from the traditional places. Professor Dinesh Saralaya, who's the director of the Patient Recruitment Centre, we hope will be able to join us for the next board meeting to talk to us in a little bit more detail about the work of that Patient Recruitment Centre and hopefully answer any more questions on that. But I think that's a really positive thing for Bradford. The Born in Bradford study, as you'll probably be very much aware of this, I mean, this was really what launched research in Bradford, I think, going back to 2006. So the initial cohort was about 30,000 children born in Bradford between 2007 and 2010, and that was following them up really over the whole of their lifetime. And during the pandemic, they were able to look at that work and that cohort and examine the effects of COVID and the differences between sort of different populations. And I think having access to that cohort was really important for that. And the COVID Scientific Advisory Group was set up using links to the Born in Bradford programme, and has been able to provide advice to sort of national bodies and locally as well on the differential effects of the pandemic. And the final thing for me to just bring to people's attention is some of the work of the Improvement Academy around COVID. So they were approached by NHS England to lead some of the work looking at oximetry at home and COVID virtual wards. So that was done not just locally, but on a more national level, but we have been able to implement that work locally as well. So we have a good setup and functioning now service for oximetry at home and for COVID virtual ward, enabling safe early discharge of our COVID patients. So that's all I plan to say. So, as I said, I think the report largely speaks for itself. We'll look forward to welcoming John and Tracy to future meetings, and particularly to Dinesh next time to talk about the Patient Recruitment Centre. So thanks, Max.
Thank you very much, Ray. Yeah, we're very proud of our research facility here. It's great to hear that we'll be looking at ways in which we link that research work more to the trust, and that there'll be regular reporting at board. That's great. I'll open for any questions or thoughts around the virtual table. Mohammed, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to say thank you to Ray and the team. I think this is a fantastic paper. I'm really heartened to see it. As you've rightly said, we do fantastic work in terms of research, and for me, it's been something that I felt conspicuously absent from our discussions at board in the past. So really pleased to see this. Really keen to get regular kind of dashboards and updates at the board. We should be rightly proud of the work we're doing in Bradford around research. And I think we have a noisy neighbour that does a lot of shouting about the work that it does. And it'd be good kind of if in Bradford, we also kind of take up some of that space and share the work that we're doing. So really pleased, Ray, and really look forward to seeing regular updates and kind of, I'd be keen to see some kind of metrics. I'm not sure kind of what metrics would be appropriate, but I leave that for you and John and others to have a look at. But in future boards, kind of on a regular basis, it'd be really good to get that.
That's great, Mohammed. Thank you. Delighted to have the endorsement. Yeah, Ray, thoughts about metrics? Data,
yeah, thank you. Appreciate those comments, Mohammed. I think it's difficult to know where to start with so much work going on there. As I said, in excess of 500 studies really at any one time. I think it's right at the moment that we picked out some of the work around COVID because, of course, that's very topical. But the research grants that we can access are enormous. Stretching to many millions of pounds, and I think that, as you say, we should be incredibly proud of the work we do. We should put it front and centre in everything we do, and as I say, incorporating it into all our clinical work will only drive improvements in staff recruitment, retention, and patient care. So I'm happy to have a discussion with you, Mohammed, if you want, about any specifics that you might think of. We'll perhaps take that offline, and if there's anything in particular you'd like to bring forward, I'd be happy to try and facilitate that.
Thank you. Thanks for the offer, Ray. Yeah, and can I endorse Mohammed's comments as well about the quality of the paper? It was there was a bursting of pride actually reading it, the work that's going on. So that's terrific. In the absence of any further comments or questions, we're being asked to note how important research activity is to our trust, and particularly the work and the contribution that they've made during the course of the pandemic. Are we content to do that, colleagues? Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. And before I finish on quality, I will build in a break, by the way. We'll perhaps have a break after the people section, yeah? So I'll build in a 10-minute break so people can stretch their legs. Just to say, before we move away from quality, Karen or Ray or Mohammed, as the current sort of NED lead on quality, is there anything any of you would wish to raise? We have the papers, we have the annexes. There are no specific further points, but I should give you an opportunity, if you wish, to raise anything further regarding quality. And I don't see any particular need to do that. No?
Max, the only thing I would say is that I've joined 2 meetings so far, and I think they've worked incredibly well. And I was slightly kind of concerned about the cast of thousands, it felt like, in terms of the people invited to the meetings, but I thought it's worked really well. And the only comment perhaps I would say is that once we come out of COVID and people end up in a more hybrid way of working, we just need to think about how will we keep such a large number of attendees in a meeting and keep it working in a hybridized way. So keen to keep the input, but we just perhaps need to think about how hybrid working would work with such a large group.
Very helpful comments. Thank you, Mohammed, and really pleased to hear some positive thoughts about the developing academies. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay. Section 4B would normally be finance and performance. There are no particular specific papers for board to consider there, but I will just give the quick opportunity for Saj, Matthew or Julie to bring to our attention anything that they think ought to be raised to board. Mel suggested, Matthew, that you might want a word on existing financial arrangements, given that we don't have a NHS settlement yet. I can see you put your hand up, so I'll bring you in now, Matthew, please.
Yes, thank you. It was really around the overall operational planning parameters, not just the financial planning. So we have established a senior leadership task and finish planning group that myself, Saj and Pat and a number of operational colleagues sit on. We've met a number of times now with the 3 work streams focusing on capacity and demand, the workforce and the financial elements of what our plan might look like. But it's probably fair to say that it's Saj's team that are doing the majority of the work at the moment. We had a very useful update at exec team meeting this week around some of the principles we are looking at and some of the aspirations of an organisation, particularly from a hospital configuration perspective. And that's now taking shape, looking at what our targeted levels of occupancy might be. And that's been shared widely across the clinical and ops teams. Members of Saj's team are looking at the capacity that we may have and what trajectory that might look like, looking at our internal core capacity, what additional work we might be able to turn on, but what external capacity might be available based on an aspirational target of delivering, and I think Saj mentioned something like upper quartile performance by a particular point in time. Understanding then what sort of gap that might create us in terms of aligning capacity to demand, but then also trying to understand what workforce do we need to facilitate that process, not only to deliver the desired level of activity, but also to manage what the new hospital configuration might look like in a post-pandemic world, understanding we will have an underlying level of COVID, but what do the various infection control measures mean in terms of what a steady state might look like for the hospital. And this will culminate. We're hopefully got a draft plan in terms of the capacity in a fortnight's time to help facilitate a place-based piece of work that's ongoing. But the expectation is that the national planning timeframe still remains Q1 for next year. So we'll try and draw all these elements together and keep the various academies and the board up to date in terms of progress. So a lot of work is still ongoing. Nothing has come to fruition yet, but we're trying to get ourselves in the best position we can to accommodate, facilitate any ICS place-based or national requirement in terms of a response.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So I'll open for any questions or further comments that either Saj or Julie might have for finance and performance. But in the absence of those,
Saj,
Saj, yeah.
very quickly give you some really top level highlights from the dashboard that's contained in there, and it just really reflect the positive work that's happening in the organisation. And some of the challenges that we've got, if that's okay with you, it'll take me a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the dashboard that's contained in the pack is December data largely, and as colleagues from the board would have seen, the fact that we've been able to maintain our ECS performance is brilliant. We are continuing to deliver sort of 86% percentage performance there, which is significantly, approximately 20% better than where we were last year, despite the challenges that we've currently got. We are continuing to experience some pressures with our very long wait patients who aren't categorised as priority 2 according to the surgical categorisations. But we are looking to work with the independent sector, and we continue to work with the independent sector indeed into Q1 and Q2 of next year for their support for P2s and P3 patients as well. So you will notice that our 52-week wait position, as is the national position, will deteriorate, and we will in fact, we are reporting some patients who've waited longer than 104 weeks. Just wanted to bring that to the attention of the board. We are reviewing all of those patients in line with the prioritisation to ensure that no patient harm has been suffered, and for those patients, they are going to be clinically reviewed and, if needed, their appointment dates brought forward. In particular, we've continued to maintain our 2-week wait performance above the standard, despite those referral rates being back to pre-COVID levels. And one of the things I highlighted to board early on was around those patients who were beyond 62 days of their treatment time frame. And you recall at our peak, we had 177 patients who'd gone beyond their 62-day wait time. I'd set an aspiration and a goal for the team to try and get that below or at 40 by the end of March. At January, we were 76, and I'm really proud and pleased to report that as at last week, we were at 43. So we're nearly there in terms of what we'd set. And for Q1, what I'm really pushing for is to try and get that number back down to about 30, if that. So real positive work there in terms of some of our cancer patients now being progressed through the system very quickly. And Q1 is going to be focused on us treating as many of our P2 patients and bringing that back into line. Diagnostics is an area that remains a challenge, but in diagnostics is particularly the endoscopy capacity, but we work with our independent sector providers on that as well. And then lastly, the only other thing I'd highlight, which I highlighted when the elder care team were here, is we still continue to be in a positive position with our long length of stay patients and our overall length of stay, and that's credit and testament to our clinical teams who continue to ensure early discharge for our patients. There were just some very high level sort of elements that I've picked out of the dashboard for board's attention.
Thank you very much, Saj. Thanks for emphasising those highlight areas as well. That's appreciated. Julie, is there anything you would wish to comment on financial performance before I move on to people issues?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add, no. Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for that additional information, Saj. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to people now, but at the end of that, so depending on how long these individual items take, we'll make sure we build in a bit of a break. But we have some important papers to consider there. We're going to hear from Mel about the Equality and Diversity Council development, and then we're going to consider a couple of papers about analysis of disciplinary practices and what our staff survey is telling us. So Mel, shall I turn to you first for developments on the E&D Council, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So the E&D Council met for the first time officially in its new format on the 26th of January. We had 22 people there from our expanded membership, so we've got a much broader range of representation. There were a few apologies, so in total the membership will be indeed broader than that, but that did include John, who may want to comment, and Selina from our board, which was fantastic. We approved our new EDI Council logo and our strapline, which is "We are Bradford. We value diversity and we champion inclusion." We approved our new terms of reference, and then the bulk of the meeting was devoted to hearing a presentation from Emmeline Irvin and Corina Bebbington, who are the leads for the Improving Population Health Programme at West Yorkshire and Harrogate Partnership. And they presented on healthy hospitals, which is an emphasis on the powerful influence that anchor institutions like ourselves can have on improving the health and well-being of both our employees and our communities. Was exactly the focus of the council in terms of its aspired influencing through its terms of reference. We also heard from our staff equality networks, our BAME network, our Enabled network for those with disabilities, and our LGBTQ+ network. We didn't actually have enough time. We ran out because we had such replete conversations on the back of the presentations to hear about feedback from our equality focus group that had taken place on the 13th of January, and therefore we will hear from Kez, who led that process at our next meeting, and that takes place on the 24th of March, where we'll also hear from Dr. Sahel Abbas, who is our population health management lead for Actors One, on the impact of the Reducing Inequalities in Communities programme that he has led on for a number of years now. There's been a significant amount of activity across both West Yorkshire and Harrogate Partnership and indeed our own place, as well as the Trust, on health inequalities, with the launch of the Health Inequalities Academy and lots of participation from members of the Trust within those workshops, which took place over a few days. Also with the launch of the BAME Leadership Fellowship, indeed we have 2 members of staff from here who are participating in that, with the intention, of course, of increasing the representation of BAME individuals in the most senior posts across the NHS. And indeed, you've already heard from one. So Wace is one of our participants, and Pat's deputy Fahim is also one of our participants. And as a place, indeed, Bradford District in Craven have 6 participants in total of that BAME Leadership Fellowship across West Yorkshire, which is probably the most of any place, I would think, which is really, really good. We also had a workshop on health inequalities and population health management, facilitated by Dr. Abbas, which I participated in. And the Health and Care Partnership Boards, in their last meetings, which would include the 2 Health and Care Partnership Boards, Bradford District and Craven and Airedale, Wharfdale and Craven, in their last meetings and the joint meeting, which was last Friday, we devoted the whole of the meeting to talk about health inequalities and how we as a place, through our Actors One programme, can start to have some traction on what will make a difference to the people in our district who are suffering the worst excesses of health inequalities, deprivation, etc. So what we want to understand really, of course, is the difference that we can make and how we will know when we've made it. So as we move forward with this work, both at place level and here in the Trust, the role really is to define our priorities and put some measures against them, so that when I report back here to the board, you can be assured that this is not just a talking shop. It's not just an interesting commentary on everything that is difficult and challenging in this district. It's actually a meaningful conversation and agreement to take action, and then mobilising to take action. So I'm proposing to bring a written report to the next board meeting and subsequent board meetings that can enable us to create a dashboard around some of that. And that's pretty much it, Chair, for now.
Thanks very much, Mel. Thank you for your personal leadership on this issue. It's great. John, I'll bring you in and maybe also ask if Selina wishes to comment on the emerging E&D Council. John.
3 quick points, Max, rather than questions. I've worked with Kez before, so I'm very comfortable with his approach, but well done for Pat for engaging him, because I think he's enhancing this work quite well. So that would be my first point. And I just wanted to reinforce what you've just said, Max, about Mel's leadership on this, that over the years, I think we've had some stuff that we've been stuck on in terms of moving it forward. And, you know, I'm not saying it's easy, and some of it will take a long time. Some of it we might never achieve, but aspirationally we want to be in a different place to where we are now. But I can't think of the right words really, Mel, but the no-nonsense, organic way you're leading it, I think will encourage other staff to embrace this in a more holistic manner. So well done, and keep that up, really. And the third point for me was what I really like about this equality work, because I've done a lot of it, and if you're not careful, you get bored of the same processes, same debates, same challenges, same issues, is that we are really trying to make this outcome focused. And I really, really commend that to people. And I'm actually quite enjoying the work. I'm finding it quite invigorating, really. Thank you.
That's great, John. Thanks. It's good to know that. Yeah. Selena, would you wish to comment on your observations from these early days? Selena, can you hear me? Perhaps not. Perhaps not. Okay, that's fine. Selena, I don't hear you. If you are trying to talk to me, I don't hear you, but that's fine. Okay, thank you. So we're asked to note Mel's update, everybody, and to endorse the work that's ongoing. So thank you very much, Mel. Pat, I'm going to turn to you now then, please, to introduce paper 12, which is a better understanding for board of our disciplinary practices and some recommendations regarding a revised procedure and strengthening of board oversight, as well as the fact that we will publish our disciplinary procedure on our public website. So that's the three key things that the board might want to keep in mind. But Pat, shall I turn to you and ask you to bring to our attention the key points, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Max. So the purpose of the paper is to assure the board that we've considered our position with regard to our disciplinary procedure, and that's both the policy and the application of that against the 7 recommendations from the independent review, which was commissioned following the death of Amin Abdullah in 2016. So we have discussed this at January People Academy, and is an area that we are working closely with our staff side on. And in 2019, when the first report came out, we sort of did a shared learning event with our staff side, which resulted in some interim policy changes. So as part of this review, we have sort of undertaken an analysis of our disciplinary procedures. And you'll see that due to the small numbers, Appendix 3 and 4 are there for you but aren't for publication. Appendix 3 was available to the People Academy in January, and Appendix 4 is a more detailed report which shows data by staff group, top 3 reasons for disciplinary action, etc. We are reviewing we are continuing to review how we report going forwards to make that data more meaningful, given the small numbers that we have to report on. So very briefly, in terms of where we are against the 7 recommendations. So recommendation 1 was to ensure that our disciplinary procedures are aligned to best practice, and we can confirm that they are. They've been subject to negotiation with our staff side, oversight by our lawyers, and are in line with ACAS, the statutory ACAS Code of Conduct, and other relevant guidance. The second recommendation was around applying rigorous decision-making methodology. So this is an area where we would say there is room for improvement, and that's basically when you look at the data. So for me, if 33% of our cases didn't actually progress to a formal hearing, if we had a significant proportion of cases that resulted in a verbal warning, those cases actually didn't need to proceed. So we are going to strengthen our policy to include an initial fact-finding investigation, which is actually what we have in our doctor's procedure, to hopefully reduce the number of cases going through. So it'll be initial fact-finding investigation. We're going to enhance the personal responsibility framework and align to just culture principles where a disciplinary intervention is the last resort. And we've already had sort of a really positive meeting with staff side on that. The next area is around training. So we have trained investigators, we've trained panel members. We are currently designing a new package as part of our leadership development offer, which will enable us to expand particularly our number of investigators. And we will be ensuring that this is a representative group. And my aim is that just as I wouldn't set up an appeal panel that isn't representative in terms of in terms of gender, ethnicity, and we wouldn't have a recruitment panel like that. I also want to ensure that our disciplinary panels are representative. So that is a goal there. In terms of resources, it is a challenge in complex investigations to handle in a timely way, and it is something that we do need to get better on. So in terms of doctors have 4 weeks. A doctor has a 4-week period to complete an investigation. Otherwise, they have to write formally for an extension. We know from experience that with doctors' cases, it is actually very difficult to conclude within 4 weeks, but it is a very tightly managed process. And that's obviously my aim in terms of our general disciplinary processes. So again, we're going to strengthen the policy in terms of a time allocation for an investigation to be agreed with the line manager, for the HR business partner to proactively manage, and then for there to be formal escalation to me after an 8-week timescale if an investigation has not been completed. The 5th area is around suspension and exclusion. I think we have strong oversight in terms of suspension and exclusion processes in the trust. So I'll talk about sort of a proposal board level oversight on that. 6th area is around sort of safeguarding and health and wellbeing in place. So we have a process to safeguard the health and wellbeing of staff who are under investigation. The challenge is ensuring that for every case that there is that regular keep in touch arrangements with an individual, and ensuring there is a nominated person who keeps in touch with someone either throughout disciplinary investigation or when someone is suspended. And that we have built that into our policy, and strengthening further by developing a wellbeing support leaflet, which will be handed to each member of staff. And then the 7th area is around board level oversight. So obviously I have oversight into disciplinary cases. The Chief Medical Officer has oversight in terms of medical cases, and the Chief Nurse also has oversight in terms of nursing and AHP cases. In terms of strengthening that board level oversight, what I'm proposing is that firstly that we have sort of an annual report that goes to the People Academy on disciplinary processes, which then obviously goes onto board to enable an open discussion. There's also a requirement under the doctor's disciplinary policy for the board to be advised of formal exclusions. I'm proposing that we extend that report to include all staff suspensions. So the report, it would obviously be an anonymised report to cover all staff suspensions on a 2-monthly basis. And within that report, you would get detail of suspension in the context of total disciplinary investigations. any new investigations coming online, and key themes. So those are the proposals around strengthening board level oversight. And then just really for the sort of the board to note the sort of the key areas that have come out through this review, which we are incorporating into our policy and application. So training is a biggie in terms of both investigators and panel members. Strengthening the timeliness around investigation completion, and strengthening the use of informal action, and obviously reviewing our health and wellbeing support. As I've said, we've already actually had 2 meetings with staff side. We're sort of quite well advanced in terms of our our policy changes, and we are proposing that we'll be able to get that through our formal consultation processes and have a revised policy in place by the 30th of June.
Thanks very much, Pat. Thank you. And we did receive some suggestions, Pat, didn't we, that future reporting might include a breakdown of sanctions by ethnicity, and
yes,
understanding of our staff mix so that we can benchmark against what the general staff mix is. And you did confirm to me previously that each time you bring a paper on suspensions, you'll use that opportunity to advise the board of any new disciplinary cases at the time. Is that all correct? Yeah.
Yes,
so,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So
some of those suggestions were received from Mohammed, so thank you for those, Mohammed, and they're confirmed. Yeah. I'll turn to anybody for questions or any other issues now. So, John, you have a raised hand. Would you like to come in?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Pat. 2 questions for me, really, and I'm happy if you can or don't want to deal with these today, for you to come back with them if it's easier. My first one, I haven't quite formulated my question, so it's a bit of an information dump, so bear with me. I'm thinking about the issue of whether we go to formal cases too quickly and whether you've got a view on that, or whether we perhaps don't go soon enough so we don't deal with stuff and then it bubbles up as a bigger issue later on. I wouldn't mind a comment on that in terms of staff's confidence to deal with that, particularly related to the equality stuff, I think, and being, shall we say, potentially criticised of racism, sexism, whatever otherism you want to throw into it, if they challenge somebody. So if you got a view on that. And the other one was the other side of that coin, really. To what extent do we guard against, and can we guard against unconscious bias, really? And I'm thinking of, I think we all fall into this trap to an extent. If you like someone or you identify with them, it's quite tempting to give them more latitude than somebody who perhaps you don't identify with so well, or you're not quite as comfortable with. You might pick up on them more strictly, or you might actually give them less latitude, or think, oh, it's obviously not a joke if they did it because they're not a very nice person or whatever. I wonder to what extent those things play out in these decision making and how we can and have guarded against them. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of your first point around sort of formal cases, whether formal cases are progressed too quickly or too slowly. So I actually think it's a real mix. So our data would suggest that that certainly at the minute that men are more likely to face disciplinary proceedings, and actually BM staff are slightly more likely to enter formal disciplinary proceedings. So that's what our data is showing. We certainly have examples where managers haven't tackled behavioural issues in a department, relationship issues, how staff are speaking to each other, treating each other, and those have escalated to the point that they have ended up in a disciplinary situation, where if there'd been earlier intervention, that would not have needed to get to that stage. So I think there is a real mix there. I think in terms of sort of guarding against unconscious bias, I think there is a big training need. There is a big training need for us, and that is going to be built into our training package for managers and investigators. One of the interventions I put in last, probably about 6-8 months ago, was we were seeing higher levels of being members of staff disciplined in corporate departments, and we actually put in an additional step where Fahim reviewed any case where there had been a proposal to take to a formal disciplinary case, and that is actually having that almost independent oversight has actually reduced cases in corporate departments, and that's something whether we're looking at whether we can sort of put in some further oversight across the board, or certainly where we see hotspots developing. I think one of our key priorities for this year is around rolling out a programme, and it is a culture change programme around civility and respect, and how we all treat each other. And if any of you have seen the Mersey Care model of that, that's something we are exploring at the moment. And you see some of these themes are coming out through the staff survey results as well. And it is sort of how we are treating each other really, and then there isn't that early intervention to sort of nip things in the bud.
Thanks, Pat. John, is that okay?
Sorry, Max, I was just getting off mute. Yeah, it's fine. I was interested to see that men are more prevalent in disciplinary cases. I think so. I was minded, Pat, and I'm being a bit facetious here. A comedian I heard last night who said men's role in life is to keep quiet, keep out of the way, and then die. Just thought I'd share that with you. Thank you.
Oh dear. I hope that's not reflected in our disciplinary policy, John. Mohammed, can I bring you in, please? Then Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Thanks, Pat. Really useful in terms of what we're doing. I completely endorse kind of the 7 steps you set out and the work that we're doing. I think it's really important work, and it's really good that we're having this discussion. And I know these discussions can make some people feel uncomfortable, but it's really important that as a board that we're leading these discussions. Max has kind of picked up a couple of things that I've kind of fed through already, kind of informally, in terms of just benchmarking the data and trying to make it more meaningful. I just wanted to perhaps make a comment about this type of data. I've done a work in this area for quite some years when I worked at the General Pharmaceutical Council, which is the regulator for pharmacy, and we had these kind of issues in terms of industrial practice in a profession that's kind of at the moment 50-50 BAME and white, and it took us a little while to get some sense out of the data, and perhaps I'll share some reflections on how we went about that. And one of the things we found that was useful is kind of using data linkages. The challenge we're always going to get with this data is the numbers are always low. I mean, if the numbers are high, you'd kind of be really worried. Yes. So the numbers are always going to be low, and there's always a challenge then to say, well, is it an aberration? Is it just noise? A kind of signal noise ratio? What is it we're actually really seeing? And I think the way to make kind of sense out of this stuff is trying to get the trend line data. I mean, I'm sure Ray and Karen will agree in terms of doing clinically as well. Quite often a single spot data field can just be an aberration. It can be random. It can be just noise. That's just what we get. What we really need to have a look at is a trend line and saying, okay, is it heading in the right direction? We know the numbers are low. They're always going to be low. And that shouldn't be a reason why we don't look into the data further. And just looking at the data that we had, with all the caveats around it, the numbers are low, etc. Just some really interesting insights, I think, just looking at this data itself. I mean, I'm not surprised that women are overrepresented, have a high proportion, because our workforce will be predominantly female to a large degree. And this is why it's important to have our res data to benchmark it against and say, how does it relate and how does it match to that? But there was some interesting, perhaps signals, perhaps noise, I don't know, in the table that we had. So in the women, for example, in the female, I think there were 35. 35% of them were Black, Asian, minority ethnic, but in the male, it's 70%. And what's really interesting, I found also, was that in every other ethnic group, it's as we would expect. It's female predominates over male. But in the two Asian groups, the Asian Indian and the Asian Pakistani, it's the other way around. It's the men that are in our data more than women, and certainly in the Pakistani men 3 times as likely. And that this can just be noise because the numbers are low. And this is why it's important we have the trend line data and our staff res data, so we can kind of data link it across. And I think that's really important for us to do, to see what's going on. What was I going to say as well? Okay. Oh, the other thing was, I think we need to link this across to, you made the reference to staff survey. Yeah, really important. I think that we need to link this across, because some of the bits in our staff survey were concerning. I mean, particularly kind of violence from your colleagues and staff members. Yes, the numbers are low, but we need to have a zero tolerance approach to. I was really quite shocked to even see the 1% number, and then to say, well, how does that translate to disciplinary action or supporting behaviours? And I think we need a trend line for both and matching them across and saying, are these two things linked because they should be, or are we not translating lived experience from our staff survey into picking it up in our disciplinary processes? Perhaps we're not sensitive enough to it. Perhaps there's too high a threshold to report it because of people are worried about victimization or other concerns. That's the kind of area I really want to explore. And I think there's a lot we can get by linking the data together, by getting trend lines and recognizing that we're not the only organization that's dealing with this. This is happening in every organization, in every professional group. And there's some good practice out there that we can reach out to. And certainly I'm happy to link you in, Pat, with the work we're doing the General Pharmaceutical Council, where we've been looking at this for about 10 years. And it was only when we started doing the data linkages that we picked up that there were some genuine hotspots. Some of it was just noise and random, and that was absolutely fine. But then we also found some real kind of issues that we had to then get to grips with. So I'd be really keen to have this data come back to us on a regular basis. I think that's what we've been promised, with that res benchmarking, with a link to the staff survey, and saying, are we picking up stuff in the disciplining process that's signalled in our staff surveys, and vice versa?
So I think it would be helpful to link in with you, Mohammed, outside this meeting. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Really useful contribution. Thanks. Very helpful. Thank you. Karen, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Pat, I think you're absolutely right in terms of, there's most of this behavioural and cultural change is really important. And I think some of this boils down to what's acceptable and people not necessarily understanding what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and the potential for pressure to impact that as well. So recognising this is 2020, I wonder whether or not we've seen an increase throughout 2020. And also the inappropriate behaviour, we've seen it in the complaints that you're getting as well. So back to Mohammed's point about the survey and then this brilliant data and then the complaint data, you tend to build a full picture. And you can see it also in the social media aspect of where your top 3 issues are. So it's, what's acceptable internally and externally, and how you people impact that as well. My question really is around root cause analysis. So what do we do on the back of complaints, the survey, and data such as this to really get to the bottom of why these things happen and what we can do to prevent it, and then how we can build a continuous improvement loop to stop these issues from happening?
Thank you, Karen.
So I'm sort of hoping that through our rollout of the Civility and Respect toolkit that we'll get there in terms of every level of the organisation, because that won't be just an intervention in one department or one area. That will be sort of a culture change programme led from the top throughout the organisation, which will actually say what is acceptable and what is not acceptable from a behavioural perspective. Departments will have their behavioural charters, and it'll be sort of very, very clear as to what is acceptable to us as an organisation and what people can expect. And I think perhaps historically we have taken a piecemeal approach. So we've dealt with an issue in a department after an issue has arisen, rather than gone in proactively at the beginning.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks. I think there are obviously conversations that we'll wish to develop at People Academy, won't there, in response to the feedback that's been received here. So that's great. And we can't answer every single point here. So that's ideal. Thank you. Karen and then Mel. Karen?
Thanks. So to Karen Walker's point, really, about how do we learn from complaints and how do we address staff attitudes and behaviours. So I'll give a really good example on how we are recruiting healthcare support workers into the organisation now. So very much values-driven recruitment processes based on kindness being one of the key attributes of why we would want you to work here. And that's very much been driven by our embedding kindness strategy, but also learning from complaints, learning from PALS issues, and actually seeing, you know, the staff that are taking down a process because they've not been kind, they've been abrupt, or not been nice. So really getting in at the beginning and making it absolutely clear what we want from somebody, and not just going for an academic qualification or experience somewhere else, but actually thinking, let's grow our own with that kindness as a key attribute.
Thank you, Karen. And Mel?
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Along similar lines to Karen's response, really, I think a lot of this is about leadership, isn't it? Fundamentally, you've got people who are leading teams of people, and you know that maxim that says the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And so giving people the responsibility and the confidence to be able to call out things on the back of the work that we will do around civility and respect, hopefully will avoid us getting into those situations. So we get a cultural shift that says it's okay to kind of say, all right, okay, let's just stop there a minute, because I don't know if you appreciated this, but this is what you just said, and this is what I heard, and then therefore that's what made, on the back of that, this is how you made me feel. And I don't think culturally that is where we are. So I think people will hear and see things and then think that the only retort to that really, and the only avenue that you can go down is to take out a grievance or take it down a disciplinary route. I think the point you make, Cameron, about the RCA bit is an important one for it's an approach that obviously is tried and tested in the clinical incidents and the complaint world, maybe even less so in disciplinaries, where we kind of think actually the manifestation of a disciplinary matter in a department must have some responsibility linked to the person who is managing and overseeing that department. So do we go down the route of the root cause far enough to understand what role the manager, the leader, the standard setter, the role model has played or not played in that occurring in the first place? And I think that's the level of maturity I want us to get to, but we're not there. We're not there yet.
Thanks very much, Karen. Thank you, Mel and Karen Dauber. Thank you for the responses there. I'm going to pull this in now. So obviously, in light of the conversations we've had and in the knowledge that the People Academy will be taking forward all those thoughts we have as directors, we're being asked today to agree with the areas of action resulting in the revised disciplinary procedure, which needs to be agreed in partnership with our staff side for the end of June. To agree the proposals around strengthening board level oversight, we want and we need to see more about this, and to note that the procedure will be published on our public website. Are we all content to endorse that in the spirit of what we've heard today and the ongoing work in People Academy? Yeah?
Yep.
Great. Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, that's noted and approved, Pat. And I appreciate we've been going some time, but let's just deal with the staff survey paper, and then we'll just have a brief break to stretch our legs. So, Pat, I'll turn to you again, please. And obviously, colleagues have seen the paper and read it. It was great to hear that there was a crossover there with the disciplinary procedures, that we can see that. So what would you wish to bring to our attention from paper 13, please?
Okay, so I've done a sort of short presentation, which I won't put up on the screen, and then obviously you have the three staff survey reports. the full report summary and the benchmark directorate report. So I suppose just in terms of background, the survey ran from September to December. So it captures the experience of staff working through the pandemic. And I suppose dependent on where you were in the country and the type of organisation that you worked in, your sort of experience was quite different. So I've just pulled out a few issues from the national overview. And there have been sort of a number of national briefings published on the survey, which I can sort of share with people if they're interested. So you'll see in terms of the number of staff who have worked in a COVID ward and the changing ways of work in terms of redeployment, working remotely and shielding. Sort of nationally, there were improved scores for health and wellbeing and safety culture, but no change in EDI and staff engagement, and no improvement nationally in the percentage of staff who experience discrimination at work. There was sort of disappointment nationally on this indicator, as I think Mohammed's picked up, sort of more than a quarter of staff said they experienced bullying and harassment from patients, with I think 15% saying that at some time they'd faced physical violence. And nationally, they are progressing, I think, at pace, the development of an NHS violence reduction strategy. There was sort of different experience for staff who worked in COVID settings and those who didn't, and that data is being explored further in this area, and we expect some further reports on that. So in terms of our trust data, in terms of how that ties in, so 40.6% of our staff said they worked in a COVID ward or department. Now nationally, a greater proportion of staff who worked in COVID wards were identified as being BAME staff. And that is the same, and that is the same with us. So we've seen nationally, it's sort of 49% BAME staff worked in a COVID area, with sort of 40% white staff, and our figures are very similar: 48% BAME staff compared to 40% white staff. In terms of redeployment, we saw 29% of BAME staff said they'd been redeployed, as opposed to 26% of white staff. No difference in terms of our data around remote workers, with that being the same at 27%. And in terms of shielders, a slightly higher proportion of BAME staff were shielding compared to white staff, with obviously a slightly higher proportion of staff who have long-term health conditions or a disability. So that's in terms of sort of the experience of working in a COVID setting. You'll see that we did manage to increase our response rate to 44%, and that's resulted in about another 500 people responding to the survey compared to last year. But nationally, there has been sort of no performance management on response rates due to the pandemic. In terms of the next two graphs, you can sort of, these are really the overview pictures of the sort of the staff survey results of the trust. So the first graph shows you sort of the 10 key themes. They make up, each theme makes up sort of a number of questions in each category, and this shows our position against sort of the worst and best trusts, and shows our position against the average. And then the next graph shows what's called the significance testing graph, and this shows where our performance against a theme has been sort of statistically different to the previous year. and you'll see that we've got 5 areas where there has been negative movement. And in particular, I would sort of pull out sort of immediate managers and team working, which we have discussed earlier in the meeting. In terms of when I've looked at sort of the experience of Wyatt trusts against this, it's quite different. There's quite a variation in terms of other trusts. So in terms of Leeds, Leeds have seen sort of reduced scores in 7 areas. So they have seen sort of a significant impact around their staff survey results. Airedale have, however, stayed pretty much the same, so not seen any movement either up or down. And Mid Yorks have seen sort of reduced scores in just 1 area, although they did just carry out the survey on the basis of a sample rather than a full census. The next graph sort of shows you our staff engagement score, because obviously improving staff engagement was our top priority. And that graph just shows you sort of how we've moved from 2016. And obviously in terms of this year, whilst we've sort of remained above average, our overall staff engagement score has reduced slightly. So in terms of what our staff feel and what sort of the positive movements are from the staff survey, so we did see an increase in staff feeling that we took positive action on health and wellbeing, and that has been pretty much in line with sort of the national increase in that area. We did see staff saying that adequate adjustments have been made for them to carry out their work. And we have seen a small incremental rise in that area since 2018. Staff told us that they were treated fairly if they were involved in an error, near miss or incident. And sort of the questions in the safety culture section are sort of all above average and are one of our best performing areas. And you know, staff told us they were happy with the standard of care if this was for a relative or friend, and confident that concerns raised by patients and service users would be addressed if those were raised. In terms of sort of the staff friends and family test indicators, in terms of recommending the organisation as a place to work, 68% of staff said yes, which again has been an increase from 2016 from 54.8% and remains above average compared to other acute trusts. And again, if a friend or relative needed treatment, I'd be happy with the standard of care. Again, 74.5% said yes, an increase from 64%. However, our staff also felt that they were more likely to have experienced discrimination at work, and that in terms of our BAME staff, they tell us that they are more likely to have experienced discrimination in the last year than white staff. Staff also tell us that they haven't had the support they need from their immediate manager, and that has been very much around the areas of feedback and being able to contribute to improvements and being asked for their opinion. Staff say they are more likely to have experienced harassment and bullying from last year. The harassment and bullying indicators are quite interesting and concerning, I'd say. So last year, in terms of harassment and bullying from patients, relatives and the public, last year, BAME staff were less likely to experience harassment than white staff. But this year we've seen an increase in a 6%. So actually the experience of white and BAME staff is fairly similar. All staff have seen an increase in harassment from staff or colleagues, and staff with a disability or long-term health condition are more likely, again, to experience harassment and bullying from patients, relatives or clients. Staff do tell us that they were less likely to look forward to going to work, which you can imagine from working through a pandemic. There's a 4.7% reduction there. And then building into the sort of the whole area of civility, respect, just culture, staff told us that they didn't receive the respect they deserved from colleagues. And again, that links into this sort of the reduction in the team working scores and potentially the number of staff that we've had redeployed and working in different areas in the trust. In terms of the RES and the WDES metrics, the RES metrics show a mixed picture. Sort of a poorer, our BAME staff are reporting a poorer experience overall than our white colleagues, but actually above the national average, which shows the lack of progress nationally in this agenda, which was pulled out earlier. And in terms of the WDES metrics, again, staff with a disability or long-term health condition are reporting a poorer experience overall, but with some improvement in metrics around reasonable adjustments and feeling that they're treated equally in terms of career progression. So in terms of what next, so you'll see from the benchmark reports that there's actually quite significant differences between CBUs and corporate departments in terms of what the results are telling us. So we're obviously in the process of reviewing our results with CBUs and corporate departments. We are going to review the results with staff networks, particularly the RES and the WDES metrics. We plan to hold sort of focus groups, with online focus groups with staff, both at sort of departmental and more general level. We'll obviously have a fuller discussion at the People Academy at the end of the month. And then from all that sort of engagement work, then we'll sort of agree our priorities for action in terms of corporate priorities and team-based priorities. In terms of staff survey information, it's worth saying we are still awaiting further data. So we're still awaiting sort of all the question areas to be broken down by demographics. So at the minute, we just have the RES and the WDES metrics broken down. We're still waiting ICS and STP benchmarking reports. And then in April, we'll also get a report of all our free text comments, which will come through in April. So that's just a very brief, high-level summary.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pat, and thank you for all the detail that's provided to board members in the papers, which I know some colleagues have had the chance to look at thoroughly. Thank you as well for addressing the issues of analysis by ethnicity and disability. And I think it's important that the board notes that the People Academy will be discussing in more detail some of the findings. Pat, can I just clarify with you that given the discussions at People Academy and the agreed priorities for action, will you be able to bring those back to board so that the whole board of directors understand what outcomes we're going to pursue arising from this? Yes. From staff, yeah. So that's clear. So thank you, Pat. I'll open up for any questions or comments, but otherwise we're being asked to note this and note that there are significant next steps available to us in terms of dealing with the detail of this, which is obviously impossible to do really at a board of directors meeting. So Mel, I'll bring you in first and then Karen. So Mel, just on mute, Mel.
Sorry. inevitably when you aspire to see year-on-year improvement, when you don't get that, you're disappointed. So clearly we're disappointed that we haven't been able to keep up the momentum that last year's survey reflected in terms of improvements in some areas. I think it's important, if you look at the national overview and our statistics, around more of the people who responded were working directly in COVID areas. So that will have an impact. More of the people were redeployed, a significant number actually were redeployed. So if you are redeployed, you're stripped out of the team that has been your team for 20 years maybe, and you are put into a completely unfamiliar environment to work in a COVID area. So you can kind of see a lot of the rationale for why people have responded in the way that they have. That's not to make excuses, but the bigger point for me is let's have a look at and just recall all the conversations that we've had today in this meeting over the last couple of hours. We've talked about equality and diversity. We've talked about disciplinary. We've talked about culture. We've talked about civility and respect. So there is nothing in this report that I don't think that we are planning to do that will have a positive impact, but it will take time, and it is a cultural shift and a cultural change. I think this exec team now is a much more visible, caring, compassionate, people-centred, kind team, and I think people are beginning to recognise that. But we're just 7 or 8 people in 6,500 people out there. So there's a lot of people we have to get to operate and think like we are thinking now as an organisation. And when we do that, it will take time. There's a lot of people. Then we'll start to make some real inroads into this.
Thank you, Mel. Karen, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Mel's covered some of the points, but I just want to make 2 further points. So the first 2 questions I go to on the staff surveys: would I recommend my organisation as a place to work, and if a friend or relative needed care or treatment? And until the last couple of years, that has been an embarrassing result for us as a trust, because we've been below average. And I think that slide that just says the difference between 2016 and now is, we should recognise that, because all of our patient safety metrics within this are positive. The second point, and it touched a bit on what Mel was saying, so Mel and I went to Ward 31 last week to recognise the year from opening our first COVID ward, and there must have been 25, 30 people socially distancing as best they could, with PPE on, etc. And what they said was, we were in a really bad place at the back end of last year as they went into the second wave. But actually, they were in a really good place, and there was a real sense of team and a real sense that they could achieve anything, and they were really positive, really thankful. And I think that's probably reflected in other teams. So back when we were asking people to complete the survey, we were in that second wave when other trusts were reporting no COVID activity whatsoever. So nationally, people were in very different places. But I think Mel's absolutely right. I think we absolutely have the team now that we can move forward with this and, become truly outstanding.
Thanks very much, Karen. So, Pat, thank you for your demonstration of that. I think as a board of directors, we're clear on the next steps. We have endorsed, and certainly the comments I've just heard from the chief nurse and the CEO, we've endorsed how seriously we take what our staff tell us, and that we will work hard to find outcomes that mitigate some of those issues. And we've also had a promise, I think, from you, Pat, that perhaps you speak with Mel about the best way for board to reconsider some of the actions that arise from the work here. Maybe it's part of a development session, or maybe it's another presentation to open board, but clearly there's a lot to go through there, a lot to work through, and board would welcome understanding what actions we're taking in response to what we're hearing from our people. Is that okay? Pat, you've frozen on me there, but I'm going to assume that's okay with you, and that I can move on from there. Yeah, we'll endorse those findings, and we're clear about next steps. Thanks very much indeed. Okay. We've been at this 2.5, well, nearly 3 hours now, haven't we, guys? So we'll take a break. I apologise, we're running over a little, but we may be able to pick up a bit of time on some of the partnerships papers are actually briefing papers for us to note, so we can do that. So let's take a bit of a break and a leg stretch now. My phone is showing 12:22, so shall we reconvene at 12:30 exactly? Yeah. Should we take that 8 minutes and have a leg stretch, get a cup of tea, and reconvene at 12:30 and work through the last 3 sections? Okay, thanks everybody. See you at 12:30.